Hello, welcome back, everyone. This is Harnessing Your Wealth. I'm Billy Peterson, your host. We are grateful for you joining us today. I think you're going to enjoy this show. How many of you out there have ever been subject to an investment related scam or fraud? And many of you are going to recognize certain things and maybe even had experiences yourself or friends, family, associates who've told you that they've been scammed or potentially almost scammed had they not had their radar up at the last minute. I want to make sure that we are all aware of these situations that are arising. And these scams are coming up more and more frequently in our business. And Shaun's on the call on the show today. We are seeing this at such a higher frequency than ever before that we thought it was prudent to do a show about the issues surrounding it, the types of scammers are out there, and even investment professionals who are putting on the hat as valued members of our community, yet have ulterior motives and who are actually unethical in their dealings. And on the call, I keep saying call, on the show with us today is our longtime client, Tricia Justice, who has her own experience in this area. And we asked her to be on today to give her story. And so everyone out there can hear what's possible, what maybe areas that you need to be more diligent in your dealings. So Trish, welcome on today.
Thank you.
We're grateful that you took a few minutes out of your day. I want you to provide our listeners with your story, your background, and how you got involved with this advisor, let's call him, who nearly took you for everything.
All right. It's a story for sure. So I think my story started back in 2010, and I was living and working in New York City. And I had a big house out on Long Island, and I was spending probably 3 hours or so a day commuting into the city for work. At some point, I decided I'm going to sell the big house. I'm going to buy a place in the city, which I did that first. Then I sold the big house, and I had a big chunk of money that I wanted to do something with. And I had it sitting in the bank, and every day it was kind of a little itch on my brain, need to do something with that money. I mentioned it to a colleague one day that I was looking for a financial advisor. And he's like, hey, I went to college. I went to high school and in college with a guy, and he actually works on Wall Street. And you would probably think already, gee, I see where the story is headed, right? Everybody knows the guy, right? So I had cocktails one night with this guy, John, the financial advisor. And seemed like a nice guy, right? Had been working on Wall Street for the bulk of his career. He lived up in Chicago, but he flew into Manhattan every Monday, went home every Thursday night, and seemed to be a successful guy. At some point, he sent me a link to his show. And he was a regular on the show that Jim Cramer does about Wall Street and trends and stocks and what's happening and how to invest and where you could go to lose your money. So when I saw him on the Jim Cramer show, that gave him a lot of credibility in my mind. So I wrote him a check for all of that money. And that money represented about 70% of my total life savings of what was going to be my retirement fund. And I wrote him that check and I sent it off, and I just kind of washed my hands of it. And I said, great, I don't have to worry about that anymore. And one of the key errors that I made that Billy uncovered once we'll get to how I got to know Billy. But one of the key errors I made is I wrote a personal check to John, because John explained to me that he had one big fund and it was in his name as the owner, but all of these other names were below it. So I wrote a check to John's personal account. And I learned much later on in the story that should have been a red flag. So I gave the money over, didn't think any more about it, felt like it was in a really good place, a really great investment. And I was getting, John had told me I would get quarterly statements from him, and I would usually get 2 or 3 a year, but they didn't come regularly, and they weren't really on his schedule as they were part of any true like fiscal close or fiscal reporting. But again, I just didn't worry about that. I didn't think
What
it was
kind of
important.
statements were they, Trish? Were they emails? Were they official statements? Can you elaborate
Well,
on that?
I thought they were official, but you later taught me they were not. But they always came to me in an email, not in a paper format, and they were basically an Excel spreadsheet.
Hmm.
So again, should have been another red flag, but I just was not thinking about it. It had the name of his fund on it and it had my original investment dollars and kind of how I was doing, but it was truly an Excel spreadsheet. So it didn't look particularly official. And again, I think the regularity, theirs not coming on like a true quarterly schedule every 3 months should have been a red flag for me, but I didn't pick up on that either. Um, Fast forward, so John's kind of managing this money, and when I did get a statement, I was making money, so I was happy. And I met a gentleman who we then became engaged, and who is now my husband. And my husband invests with Billy. And I really don't know how long the relationship had been going on, but for quite some time. And my then fiance, now husband, Mark, said to me, he's like, "Hey, I want you to meet my financial advisor. And just check him out. Like, you seem to have all of your money is with one guy and it's in one type of product. And you really should think about diversifying." So I met Billy one day, we talked, and he said, "Hey, why don't you send me some statements? I'll take a look at what you have, and I will let you know if I think I can do better for it." And I said, "Okay, great." So I forwarded him a couple of statements, and Billy looked at the statements, and he and Shaun probably thought, "Oh boy, here we go again." And he called me and he started explaining to me all of the things that were wrong with these statements. So they weren't official statements, as you said. And I think I immediately went into a state of denial, and I'm like, "Well, hey, this I gave this guy all my money, and he's been managing it for a while, and I'm getting these really great returns." And Billy pointed out some things that were wrong with the statements. He pointed out the fact that what I thought I was invested in would never perform as well as it did. And Yeah, kind of everything else that was wrong with this picture. And I, in my head, wanted to think that this was just a disconnect, that maybe what I sent Billy was not what I was supposed to send him, or that Bob probably sent me something else and I just didn't send Billy the right thing. So I started looking through all of my emails, and everything looked the same. And then Billy asked me a question, which I think was another telltale for him, just red flag after red flag for Billy. And I was just not picking up on it, was, had I ever gotten a 1099 for the account? And I said, "No, 1099, no." And I'm an HR professional. That's what I do for a living. I know what a 1099 is. And my company issues them out to many people. But I had never gotten a 1099 from John, my investor. So enough red flags that I had a conversation with Billy, and he helped me formulate the conversation I was going to have with John. And he said, "Hey, just call him and tell him that you're about to get married, and that you believe the right thing to do is that you and your soon-to-be husband are going to put all of your accounts and all of your management under one advisor. So you'd like to basically, I'd like to transfer everything from John to Billy's firm." And I made that phone call, and took me a couple of phone calls to get a return call, but I made that phone call, and I got a story that I thought, well, okay, that sounds reasonable. So again, I called Billy back, and I explained to him, I said, "Hey, well, John told me it's going to take him a while to sell, to liquidate some things, and couple weeks I'll get a check." And again, red flags for Billy, because he knows what he's doing, and I did not, quite obviously. He said, with the type of investments I have, when I say I want to liquidate things, he should be able to liquidate things and issue me a check fairly immediately. And all of these things, I was still in that process of denial, because I didn't want to accept the fact that I had been taken advantage of, and that I had been really made to look quite foolish in this entire process. So I waited a couple weeks, and I called. I kept calling John and calling John, and he finally said to me one day, the check is in the mail, and I got a check back from him. And another red flag: it was a personal check from him. It was not a check from any sort of an account or from Peterson Wealth Services or Raymond James. It was a check from John's personal account. But the second I got the check, and it was for $500,000, and that was a little less than half of the money I thought I had coming, I went right to my bank and I deposited it. And I thought, oof, okay, that's some of it. And I will just keep following up and keep following up, and eventually I'll get all of my money back. And I think it took about 48 hours when I got the dreadful call from my bank that check had bounced. So then I called John back again, and was a little more forceful. And he kept saying, oh, I can't believe that happened, and that must be an error. And I was out of town, and I transferred some money, and that must not have happened. I'll get you another check in the mail. And eventually I got a check for $250,000. So the amount that I'm getting back is less, but at least that check cleared. And as soon as that check cleared, it just became a phone call exercise for me. And one day that I called John, his wife answered the phone, and she's like, oh, well, he's in the hospital. He's had a massive heart attack. And I was like, okay, I've stressed this guy out. Like I need to slow my jets a bit and let him get well. So I waited a couple months, and then I called back, and he answered, and I was like, so we've got a gap here of, you've given me back about a quarter of what I've invested with you. When can I get the rest of my money back? And it started being like lots of excuses. And it was always that I have to move some things around. I'll get you another check, and I'll get you another check. And I never got all of the money back.
Didn't you have to actually almost threaten him with calling the SEC before he really got serious about giving you that second check?
Yeah, well, I didn't think I actually threatened him with taking that action, but I said, hey, I'm going to fly up to Chicago, which is where he lived. And I said, I'm going to knock on your front door, and I'm going to sit there with you and have you explain to me like what is going on. And I want to leave there with a certified check, because I'm not trusting your checks anymore. And I talked to one of the lawyers that I worked with, and they're not the type of attorney that would handle this kind of thing. And they suggested that I should get an attorney, but I'm not one of those that jumps to the I want to sue first. Mm-hmm. So I ended up getting another check from him. But again, not all of the money that I was expecting to get. And then one day I got a call from the Illinois Security and Exchange Commission, and I might have gotten that title wrong again.
No, that was right.
They were calling me because they were conducting an investigation on John, my financial advisor. And John wasn't, in fact, certified to do what he was doing. And I came to find out that John was putting my money and the money of all of his investors into his personal account, and was living quite well. He had, a second wife. He had 5 kids he was supporting. And I think my asking for my money back started a house of cards. And what I found out through the investigator that I was talking with was that Bob was, again, just spending our money. He wasn't really investing any of our money. And the story just kept unfolding and unfolding. And, John was on the board of his children's school, and he was all of his kids, 5 kids in private school. He was actually stealing from his children's private schools and taking their money and spending it. And when I called and said, hey, I want all my money back, he was trying to figure out where he could get more money from to pay me back and make me go away. And I think someone else probably called at around the same time, which caused his house of cards to start collapsing around him because he didn't have the money to give me, and he didn't have the money to give to his other investors. And I think, and at this point, I realized I was involved in something that was illegal, and I was concerned about my own liability. So I then hired a lawyer for myself, and a lawyer that specializes in this area. And I said, hey, I'm scared to death and I'm going to go to jail. And, we walked through everything. I showed him all of the documents, and he said, okay, you're involved in a scheme. You haven't done anything illegal. He said, but there is a risk that some of the money that you've gotten back, you're going to have to give back, right? Because as the Security and Exchange folks look into this, they may decide to give everybody an equal percentage of the money that they invested. I was probably one of the first ones that asked for my money back. So I got back a good chunk of it, not all of it, but a good chunk of it. And so he said, your biggest risk is you're going to have to give that money back. He said, but I don't see anything else that you've done wrong in this situation. So it goes from me being happy about investments to finding out that I'm part of a scheme, I guess a Ponzi scheme or a financial scam, to Security and Exchange. I'm now talking to federal law enforcement about something that I didn't even realize I was doing wrong. And just when I thought this story could not end any worse than it did, I think John, his house was collapsing around him. He went and checked into a hotel room and took his own life. And I still feel like I had a part in driving that decision for him to do that, because his house was crumbling and he did have a wife and 5 kids to take care of. And he had all of these investors counting on him, and he had defrauded all of us. So it was just a horrible, horrible experience for me personally, for me financially. But when Billy asked me to share my story, and I said, well, hey, I'll probably look like a big fool. At the end of the day, I want to share my story so that if one person hears this and it keeps them from being defrauded the way I was, it makes all of the difference in the world.
For sure.
Well, it's important, we think, to bring light to this situation and how actually pervasive it is in our society. And thank you for going into that. We know it's not easy. It's something that people need to hear, though. So we appreciate you being willing to share it. I will say that actually occurs more than we think. And that actual outcome is fairly common, where the scammer gets to the point where they're in so deep and they know but they finally realize there's no way out. And the only way out of that condition is to avoid facing the reality, and they take their life. And that's what he chose to do, unfortunately. And I hate the fact that his kids have to grow up without a dad because of the decisions he made. And it can be so easy to get into that trap, because he comes across as a credible source. He was on Jim Cramer, for heaven's sake. He was someone who had a following. He's had the appearance. He had all the talk. He's talking the talk. But they're out there everywhere. That there are 30 million people in our country alone who fall prey to investment scams every single year. The average loss in those scams is $15,000. Now, high net worth and affluent investors can lose substantially more than that. It's all a matter of how much people have and how much they're willing to give up or trust these other people with their money. So we want to talk about a couple of things, additional stories here real quick. Shaun, you have one to share, I think is also going to resonate.
Yeah. I mean, what Trish experienced was, an unfortunate thing. And there's ways to check for financial advisors, see if they're licensed and everything, and, a broker check, but we can go into that maybe at the end of the show. But this story is sickening to me that we have to share. Billy and I have worked with a client for many years and always been a good client, always very planning oriented, the type of person that we want to work with. And we'd always sit down and say, hey, you're on track to retire, at 62, a little bit early retirement, and just always happy. And we had kind of our final meeting before he retired, and he had a 401k that he'd already rolled over to us. It was in an IRA, but there was a little portion left in the 401k. So we needed to complete that rollover to get him fully out of his retirement plan at work and start, sending him distribution checks from all the hard work that he'd saved up. And when the check came, he said, "Hey, I want to do something else with that money." And I'm thinking, well, maybe he's going on a big trip or something like that. And he said, "No, there's this gold investment that I want to do. I found this website and it's looking like I can make a lot of money." And my radar goes up. I was on this phone call and I said, that doesn't sound right, Mr. Smith. I mean, getting into gold and making all this money, that's not your typical reason for getting into a gold investment. And the returns you were talking about just did not make sense. And I said, "Well, look, we'll deposit this check, just request a partial transfer to this advisor or firm that you're working with." He kept referring to a website, which was another red flag for me. He'd never met anybody. And tell him to request a transfer. Well, he calls back next day. They don't take IRA funds. They need me to cash out the IRA and then send them cash. Another red flag. And I said, that doesn't make sense. Any qualified custodian should be able to accept IRA funds with just an electronic transfer. Doesn't make sense to me. I don't think you should do this. I really consider this. And I'm literally sounding like I'm begging this person on the phone not to do this because I did not feel good about it. I'd ran it by Billy. He did not feel good about it. And it did not sit right. So think about this. To get him the funds, he needs to cash money out of his IRA. So that's a taxable event at that point. All right. And at the time he was under 59 and a half. So we're talking about an extra 10% penalty. So all said and done, I mean, depending on tax brackets, you're probably talking 30% or more lost to taxes. He proceeds with this transaction. And I'm, again, advised against this. A few days later, or maybe a month later, calls back, says, "Hey, I need to take more money out." And I said, "Well, what's it for? Can I ask you a little more about it?" "Well, it's the same investment. I've made a lot of money, but in order to get my money out, they're telling me I need to pay the taxes on this gain, and then they'll send me the big chunk of money." And I said, "This is not how that works, Mr. Client. That you don't pay taxes mid-year on investment. It's issued on a 1099. This does not make sense that you have to pay to get your money out." No. This I trust them. This makes sense. And I'm at this point, I'm basically refusing the transaction, saying we're not doing anything until I talk to more people at Raymond James, their fraud department. I want to talk to your trusted contact. And we're doing all these things and we're documenting this, and actually had him sign a letter that we believe this was fraud and that he was making a huge mistake and this was not a legit investment that he was working with. Proceeds with the transaction. And me and Billy are just sick about this. Billy had a conversation with him too. And a month later, calls again. And I'm just sick. I know what's coming. He needs more money. But this time it was, "Send me everything." And it kind of changed his tone. It was like, "Look, I'm sick of begging for my money from you guys. I know what I'm doing." And just not the typical personality from this client. Always so happy and good to work with. But this time it was getting a little more like, "You're going to do what I say, and I don't care what advice you have to give." Again, I went through it because we care about our clients and we knew what was happening. It just had a gut feeling. And again, did everything we could to say, it does not make sense. Will you slow down? Will you think about this? And he's like, "No, I'm making millions. It's showing me on my screen. I'm making millions." And we're like, "Well, good. Let's deposit it back and avoid, you can redeposit into an IRA within 60 days and maybe avoid some of this stuff that's going on." Didn't matter at that point. Takes the whole retirement account to go do this.
Pays taxes, pays penalty.
Pays taxes, penalties. None of that mattered because in his mind, he was making so much more money, could cover that. Another month goes by or so and get another phone call. And I'm at this point, I'm wondering why he's calling because there's no more accounts with us. And it was a very somber phone call. I could tell where this was going the second I picked up the phone. And he said, "Hey, I need to call you. I want to tell you guys that I owe you an apology. I think you were right. And I'm very fearful that all my money is gone. I've not received anything. And they're asking me for more money to get money out of it." And I'm going, I'm just sick. My stomach just dropped because this to me was officially it. Like, okay, he's gone through all this. He's now come to the realization that this was a fraudulent scheme. And he told me he'd contacted the FBI and different, agencies, and they're telling him the same things that we were telling him the whole time, that this is not right. And he's just wondering, is there anything we can do? And I'm going, what can you do at that point? Your money has been sent to this, and they could be anywhere in the world. And it was just so sickening. And
it raises
something I'll never forget. And it just, and that's out there so much. And he's just communicating via email, and they've got a website, and they're showing me the returns, and it just seems so legit. And you've got to look past all that. And I think in this case, it was the promise of high returns, which is another red flag. No one should be promising you anything when it comes to investing or guaranteeing you anything. So, and it just, the wide eyes were just there. The financial plan that we drawn out was going to be just perfect for this client. Yeah. And that all got thrown away because of this big prize in front of him.
And it's super sad that those things happen and have to happen. And we see it, and we're seeing it at, like I said, a higher regularity. The scammers are getting very creative. They are getting super sophisticated in how they target people. How they push all the right buttons for people. They say all the right things. They've figured out who people are on a personal level to be able to find out what's going to make them want to invest or want to transfer that money or want to make that call. Mm-hmm. And even though this person had an advisory firm, had us on his side, doing all the right things, planning and talking and overseeing and giving him what we felt was right advice, it's still, he was still caught up in it, and he was still overtaken. And imagine having lost your entire retirement to this, and there's no way to get it back. And this is traumatizing. And I hope this is sinking in, because you have to be so diligent in this day and age, not only if you have money to invest, but where you're going to invest it. Because I've never seen more places to invest in my entire life, in my entire career. There are so many new things popping up on a regular basis. Every time I turn around, there's another investment idea. And you hear them on the radio, you hear all these promises. And I mean, they're supposed to be regulated in what they can tell you, but most of them don't even care about these restrictions and regulations. They promise high returns. They promise, we're going to make this for you. And we've done so well for all of our clients. And so people now taking huge fortunes, huge amounts of their retirement to put in cryptocurrencies or digital wallet, everything that you can think of that you don't know where it is anymore. It's somewhere out there in some internet cloud system.
Everybody remember NFTs? You don't hear about that anymore. Buying photos, or
they come and go. Yeah. But there's a lot of risk. And please be diligent. The scammers are good. Even if you have an advisor, sometimes the advisor is unethical, and actually they're in it for their own benefit versus the client. And that's called the fiduciary responsibility. When you're going to meet with a professional to take care of your money, number one, you want to make sure that professional works with a custodian that is very well known and has the reputation. Okay, you can't give money to people who don't have a custodian. Never is it allowed for an advisor or a financial professional to commingle money with a client. Okay, check that out. Who's your custodian? That's what you ask. Are you a fiduciary? Another thing you ask. And then go ahead and check their licensing. Okay, because if they're licensed, they have to produce that. They have to verify and show you that they are licensed and who they're regulated by. Is it FINRA? Is it SEC? You can go to a website called Broker Check and verify that the person you're considering working with is licensed and has the number of years of experience they claim to have. It would also tell if they've had any issues, regulatory issues, of disciplinary actions against them, things like that you might want to know about. Also, reputation is huge. So talk to some clients. You should ask them for some references of existing clients, and you may want to reach out to a few of them. Check and see who they're working with, what type of clients they work with, what products are they pushing? Are they pushing products? And that's another red flag for me. Is it all about a commission? We had a client a few years ago who retired and had a large amount of money, but he'd sold his business and that was all he had. And he went and met with several advisors and he decided, hey, I want to work with Peterson Wealth Services because, I like what they stand for. And a lot of my friends are working with them. And we started gathering up all of his statements and asking him about different investments. And come to find out, he had a huge life insurance policy. Now he's single and his kids are all well off on their own. And so we asked him, what is this life insurance policy for? And he said, well, this investment agent or life insurance agent that I met with said, this is a good investment for me. I needed it. And so we kind of got curious about it. We wanted him to give us more information. And we said, what's going on in here? Why do you need this? And so he said, well, it's a $10 million life insurance policy. And we said, okay, what's the premium? So he has an annual premium of $650,000 a year. Totally unaffordable for what amount of money he had set aside. That was his retirement. There's no way his investments could produce $650,000 a year. In other words, all of his money was eventually going to be in this life insurance policy had he followed the instructions. So what we find out is the insurance agent made $425,000, give or take, on selling this policy that was absolutely inappropriate for the client. So he felt like, hey, I've already put 2 years worth of premiums in this. I'm out 1.2 million, 1.3 million. And we said, well, not so fast. Let's see what we can do here. And we actually had him contact the state insurance regulator, a commission, and he contacted them. They said, okay, you have a complaint. We filed this form with us. And he did. And we helped him fill it out, actually, because we knew all the ins and outs of what was a good investment for a client and what's an inappropriate investment. And regulators' job is to keep people aware and out of those unethical, inappropriate investments.
Unsuitable. That's the term they use.
It's a good term. That's the term they use. So he wrote it. He wrote the letter, sent the form in, and the regulators actually cracked down on this agent. They got all his money back. Okay, and they put a hefty fine on that firm.
They did. And we looked up the agent, the advisor, through the broker check, and there was a history of complaints very similar to what happened to our client. Again, another red flag. And I think he got barred. I think he lost his license, if I remember right. And you know what was funny? I remember about that story. They were friends through church. Do you remember that, Billy?
Yeah.
Which is another, and that out in Utah, and I'm not picking on LDS church, any church, okay? I've seen that multiple times where it's a very good friend, and they
you're supposed to trust your
friendship.
Church people. I mean,
right.
They're supposed to be the most honest and trustworthy people around, but they use that as a front in order to get people's trust, loyalty, and money. And
Scary.
it really is scary. So maybe not as a direct scam per se, but it's still a way for people to lose a lot of money. You think carefully about what people want you to invest in and why, and who does it benefit. So we're always talking about make sure your investments are appropriate for you. Does your advisor have a well thought out plan customized to you and your goals? Or is it just something that he or she wants to run through as an ability to get you through their system and get you into a product so they can make money and move you along the line? So many things that we can talk about. We're going to go in. This is going to be a 2-part podcast. So the show next time you're going to see is on specific scams that are coming out so common that we have to be aware of. And they're tended toward elderly. So there's one called the grandparent scam. They're tended toward people who are easily manipulated. So in other words, lonely. Let's say people who want a relationship. So somehow they meet up with an acquaintance online, and one thing leads to another, and then they're scammed that way. There's email scams. There are phone scams, shopping scams. We even had a couple here in the office where my own staff had people emailing them, impersonating me. The email came from a different email address. It was a funky email address, but it was signed Billy Peterson. and it was saying, hey, I need you to run over and get some gift cards. I need you to buy $5,000 worth of gift cards at the store. We're going to send these out to clients. And it was like urgency. It's like me getting all ticked off that they weren't getting it done.
And so, when Billy's ticked off, you act.
So people would jump and run and go buy these gift cards like, hey, I want those now immediately. And we actually had an employee who did that here a couple of years ago. And I get to the office and she goes, here, the gift cards are on there. I was just going to respond back to you and give you all the numbers. So she was going to respond back to this email, give all the gift card numbers, and then that money's gone. You see how they work it? It's so pervasive, all these different things that they dream up. And we want to make sure we're sharing it. I share all these different scams, how to spot them and how to avoid them. So today's show is about advisors who are unscrupulous, who have very bad ethics, who take advantage of people. Go back to the Madoff situation. We talk about Bernie Madoff a lot. And we understand that he had decades worth of fraud going on. And the agencies, the government agencies that are in charge of regulating firms like his, actually missed every sign. They actually had a reporter, Harry Markopoulos, I believe it was his name, and he worked for the New York Times, I think, and he actually submitted 3 different investigative reports to the SEC in the state of New York at 3 different years saying, this is not right. These returns don't add up. You should investigate this. Each time, they just blew it off as if the reporter had no idea what he was talking about. And guess what? End of the day, when everything came to light, the curtain was pulled back. He lost $50 billion worth of client assets. And the crazy part is he never invested one dime of that money. All that money came into an account with his own firm that funneled right down into his own personal slush fund. So Trish, this is the same thing that happened in your case. He just had a little bit more sophisticated front because it was called Madoff Investments. So the money would be deposited to Madoff Investments, but none of it was invested. And they actually, he had employees who were separated on a different level of their building, that only 2 of them could go into this level. And they were doctoring the statement. They were producing fabricated statements for all of their thousands of investors every month. And they would do it by looking back the past week or 2, seeing what investments were doing well. And then they would print those as if they were invested for those clients. So they always had rear view mirror investing, we call it. It was always working out well. They were making 20% plus every single year. No one was losing money. Even when the markets were down substantially, somehow he was able to make money in those years. The money just kept pouring in and pouring in. And that's the classic Ponzi scheme. When people need their money, he would just take some money from new money that was coming in and pay them off. But very few people wanted their money back. They're all making so much.
The recession hit.
Yeah.
08, 09.
Till that real estate collapse. And then they needed money to, pay off some of their outstanding debts or liabilities, things like that. Things got really scary and they wanted their money in cash again. That's what happens all the time, by the way. People want cash when things get scary. And come to find out, that's when the whole thing broke down. So scary things, sophisticated people claim to be doing all this great stuff with your money. Custodians seem to be legit. He had his own firm, was the custodian. Just people need to be aware of those things. So Trish, thank you so much for sharing your story today. We think it's so valuable to hear it.
You're quite welcome.
Yep. Well, guys, thanks for joining us today. Remember to tune in next time when we're going to talk more about specific scams and how they target people, what to be aware of. Until then, stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to Harnessing Your Wealth with Billy Peterson. Before we declare the race official, please click the follow button so you can be notified when new episodes become available. For more information about today's show, please check out the show notes. Visit our website at www.petersonws.com or give us a call at 801-475-4002. Once again, thank you for listening. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Peterson Wealth Services. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.